Looks like a gamer tag.
Okay, I think we are getting live. Hi everyone, welcome to Quick Connect Live session. It's been a while since our last session, so thanks. Very happy to see everyone. Today's session we're going to talk about profiling tools again. It'll be our last session on profiling tools before we move on to something else. And we're going to talk about this thing that most people are probably familiar with. It's called the Big Five, and some people know it as Ocean as an abbreviation. And I will not steal Ethan's thunder because he will be our resident expert to share about.
I'm not the resident expert. I'm sorry, I haven't done enough research this round because we got so busy doing this thing. But actually, what happens is that I had a lot of exposure to Big Five because there are actually about 3 or 4 companies that I know that are based on this for profiling at HR and all this kind of stuff, which I'm not really much for, partly because of the way that it's worded after the test is done. So actually, anybody here who has actually used Big Five before? Big Four, Big Five, Big Four, Big Five. Anybody here who has used the Big Five before has gotten your personality tested on Big Five?
No, I've
No,
not.
Not at all.
I think later, what we can do is, Ethan, you can just bring us through a brief intro to what the Big Five are, and then we can just go and explore how it is for us. Unless there's something that we can take very quickly for Big Five.
Absolutely. So actually there's you can actually take the Big Five test on openpsychometrics.org. There's actually a lot of open source available tests available on GitHub to put Big Five onto your website.
Okay, cool. So what we can do is, I guessing in interest of time, let's guess what you think of Big Five are. Then at the end of the session, what we can do is we can come back and then we can take the test. And you can see whether you're right or wrong.
Yeah, you can take. But what do you think are the Big Five? I think this is fun. Like I love it that Alex is asking this. What do you think the Big Five are? This Zaber forensic, is he messaging anybody on Telegram or anything?
No lah.
Should we let the person in?
We can if we just let one person in and not everybody.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna let him in.
Yeah.
And then if anything happens, we can just kick him out. Hi, Zeba. Nope.
He didn't even connect to audio.
Yeah.
Connection.
Yeah.
This is very strange. We've gotten this person put try to come in over and over again.
It's okay lah. Let's see who it is. Okay, so maybe a quick introduction to. You put him back to waiting room.
I'm putting him back to waiting room because he didn't connect anyway.
Okay, so so everyone, maybe just a quick introduction and then of yourselves. Then Ethan, you can take it away.
Yep, sure. I think we could do a round table. Everybody introduce yourself. I can introduce myself first. Okay, hi, I'm Ethan. I don't know what I'm running anymore. I was focusing on the Office Matters previously, which is meant to solve office politics, which actually, as I was doing this, it was actually successful in helping people and moving past office politics. So I've helped people got better jobs, better positions in companies, manage all the different bosses and issues in companies. However, because I have as this part of this culture change thing, we started experimenting with a new concept. So I'm now starting a cybersecurity training provider school kind of thing. So right now, as we're talking, we're starting it up. It's a very interesting bunch of products that we're actually bringing to train people in cybersecurity. But what we're talking about today has nothing to do with that. It has to do with our love for psychometrics and our love for everything regarding psychology and people. Actually, that's the thing that ironically is the biggest downfall in cybersecurity, people. So if you know how to profile people, cybersecurity might be for you. Yeah, but yeah, that's an ironic, funny thing. But yes, next we can go to the next person. Actually, let's go to Daniel since he was the next to come in.
You're on mute.
I've just left corporate world of 23 years and going into coaching. So in coaching professionally, I'm a rookie. Those are my Gallup strengths. And I've gone on to do other psychometric as well as social metric tools as well. Tools like, for example, multiplier effect, the EQI, like what Ethan is saying, right? You need to profile people before you can decide whether to promote them or not in the corporation. And I'm doing other stuff like Soundwave is social metric as well. So a few others lah. But essentially that's what I'm doing. Yeah, I love exactly Soundwave. Yeah. So I'm doing stuff like that. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel.
Welcome.
Joanna, next.
Yeah, I'm currently doing user research. And then subsequently I'll be moving into like a position where it's like more like learning and training related. So generally I'm interested in these kind of things. And in the past I studied psychology lah. So I've had exposure to Big Five before, but I've not taken the like test before. Yeah.
Awesome. So you know more about Big Five than me. Awesome. Faith?
I'm Faith. I am doing things related to internal processing, updating the internal process for all departments except for finance. And I also look into researching on products to be added onto the company portfolio. I have experience with Big Five. Those personality tests that I take, I usually will retake after a few years. So yeah, I got recently take Big Five, I think last year. Yep, but let's talk more later.
Okay, awesome. Jeffers?
So I design leadership programs in the civil service or public service. Also do some coaching related to human genetics, which some of y'all have attended. And more into the mental health space recently.
Trauma?
Recently, not really trauma, just psychological first aid. We haven't talked about shadows, right? There's another time we can explore that.
That's exactly my zone, man.
Actually, that could be our next topic for Quick Connect Live.
Shadow self.
Carl
Jung, right?
Ninja Turtle. Okay, never mind. What's that? Okay, never mind. Sorry. My childhood's coming back to me.
Where did the ninja? Shadow. Oh,
Shadow, right? Aren't they like the clan?
yeah. I did not realize it because Shadow. There's also the characters in Marvel and DC. So yeah.
Okay, so yeah, many references to Shadow. Sorry, the nerd and geek part is coming out. So, Jeffrey, have you done? Okay, cool. So everyone, my name is Alex. Running the Strengths Finder Singapore meetup, and my latest addition to what I'm doing or what I'm learning is this thing called human-centered design as part of my job. So new thing to learn. And Joanna, I'm going to talk about user design using human-centered design. I want to talk about it. I'm actually quite open to explore, and practice some of these things and see if there's some ideas you want to take and use, and that's totally fine.
By the way, as part of my past life, I was actually a UX designer for a good 2 years. So
and you got two people you can reach out to get ideas.
No, I'm just saying, like me and Alex had a great talk about HCD. Because I actually took the IDEO program, but then I didn't really complete it, but yeah. They had the HCD self-done project that they like to get people to do. I'm pretty sure Alex will finish it one.
I can't remember. Is it free on Coursera?
It's a free one, but then it's like a period of time you need to get a group and go and do the human-centered design project.
Okay. I already have another methodology, right? This thing called
Luma, right?
Yeah. So if you want to, we can explore that. And gives me.
You want to talk about Sigma, our other person here who is I don't know. Sigma is a very interesting name. I'm not sure if it's a.
I don't think so. Hey Sigma, welcome to the group. Maybe a quick introduction of yourself and to switch on your video. You are muted.
Hi Sigma.
Very silent.
Okay,
we're going to leave you there for a while, and after some time, do come on. If not, then we will put you back to the waiting room.
Yep.
Okay, so Ethan, over to you. Share about Five.
Okay, so I was supposed to do all the research about this. I have to apologize, guys. I did not do that much research. I was supposed to be able to present on all of this, but I did not have the space to do so. But what happened is that I'm just drawing from my knowledge and having dealt with this a number of times with different companies. So Big Five is actually an open source personality test that's available for everybody to see. So unlike StrengthsFinder, which you need to go past a paywall to be able to get, or like Emergenetics, where you have to go through a person like Jeffers to be able to take, Big Five is currently available as open source, meaning can get it anywhere and it's always available. The development and the design of this was on purpose because they wanted to be very easily reproducible on a scientific level. So that's actually why Big Five came about and became popular. So if you read up the history on this, right, there's actually, oops, I should have shown this. This is Ocean already. The 5 factors. Did everybody? Nobody saw it, right? Okay, can. So one of the major things about this is that for us to be able to talk about this is really about the major 5 factors, and this is based off this idea of lexical hypothesis approach. So there's this guy who actually started this whole process. His name is Francis Galton. So they have this lexical approach because what happens is that they are really the definition of lexical is like it's almost like you need to have the different facets, right, to be able to analyze a person. And so unlike like where StrengthsFinder came from is actually a lot large scale studies in which you take the words, you reduce it down to the 34 at the end of the day, which is what how CliftonStrengths came about. The way that even emergenetics came about is a very different approach. It's a very specific thinking process approach. Whereas this is all about personality. It's about the different aspects of personality, which is why they actually have 3 main categories that came out of from it. Anybody who also dealt with hexaco or 16PF? All right, okay, Jeffers has dealt with it because Jeffers has input as well. And all these kind of different things. So one of the major things about this is that we once we see this, right, like lexical approach is always about like the different dimensions of personality. I think this is where we need to look at the idea that there is always a comparison. There's an opposite end of the spectrum in order for this to be a lexical approach. So every single, the ocean categories, there's always 2 ends of the ocean, each of the factors. So that's why the Big 5. So now with that, I just want to go back to what Alex said, which was guess the Big 5. What are the 5 factors? Because okay, we have our classic MBTI, which is like what? Extraversion, introversion, thinking, feeling, and then with emergenetics, there is like your analytical, your conceptual, your social, as well as your structural thinking. What do you think is the approach that Big 5 takes?
Openness.
Openness.
Conscientiousness.
You're not reading, right? But you're remembering, right?
My input lah. Extraversion.
Extraversion.
I think agreeableness and neuroticism.
Yeah, neuroticism. Right. Great. Your input is perfect. Okay, so these are the 5 things. What do these words mean? I would like to get everybody to kind of guess. Just because every time we did this personality psychometrics, right? Always the thing is that when you read the word, there's so much misunderstanding going on. So every single one of our previous rounds, right, there's always like a what does this really mean?
Definition, right? Yeah.
Yes. So let's try to guess what they mean. I think this is part of the fun of this round because I'm not gonna lecture you guys. We're just gonna see what it means to each of us. Alex, want to try?
I was thinking openness is like the willingness to take in another person's opinion. But that's like, okay. Yeah, that's what I think, right? So if you're willing to take a counter argument or opposite position, then that's openness.
Daniel, want to try?
You're muted.
No, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, just read me again. I believe consciousness might refer to someone's dedication or discipline.
Openness.
No. As in conscientiousness. No. He can talk about conscientiousness.
Okay.
But it's conscientiousness, not consciousness.
Yeah, conscientiousness as in terms of a person's discipline in wanting to get something done, or not.
Interesting. Very cool. Jeffers, what do you choose one and explain? Just try it. There's no wrong answer, right answer, because at the end of the day,
I'm not reading from Wikipedia, so I'm just guessing. So.
Yeah. No, nobody knows for sure. My exposure to it, I know what it means, but it's how we want to interpret it, right? Like Jeffers?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start agreeableness. I think it's more like how well a person gets along with others, in terms of whether it's competitiveness or cooperation.
Faith, want to try?
I think extraversion is more towards whether you are like extrovert, whether you'll be seeking for experience, that kind of thing.
Seeking experience versus the other opposite end, which is wanting to go for more familiar grounds.
Correct.
Cool. Joanna, so you only left with neuroticism.
Yeah,
You study psychology, so you can do this.
it's been so long, I can't remember. I think it's about like the stability of the emotions, how easily their emotions are affected. Something along those lines.
Interesting. Okay, so by right, the definition of neuroticism in psychiatric terms is how obsessive they can be about certain things. But that's a psychiatric term. So because we're on Wikipedia, I'm just going to go down to the details of what exactly it means. Because it's an open source thing, right? Wikipedia actually has it quite accurate, thankfully, because there's not much restriction of the data that is available. So there's a definition that is actually available here. So actually, ironically, openness is what Faith describes as extraversion. So the art, emotion, adventure, unusual ideas, like experimental, going out there and do new things. So there's openness to experience, not necessary to other points of view. So individuals of high openness are said to pursue self-actualization by seeking out intense euphoric experiences. So low openness gain fulfillment through perseverance and are characterized as pragmatic and data-driven. So this actually is quite interesting, right? Because again, right, openness is such an open term, right? So it's very gray, right? What are your feelings about this now that you read this?
Okay, so pardon I'm not a psychologist, but in reading this, the thing that is missing is that this is talking about an experience, an openness to an experience, whereas extraversion tends to have within it the component of other people. That an extrovert would connect with other people. Openness tends to connect with an experience, an exposure to an experience. Like, for example, here it states that pursuing self-actualization by seeking out intense euphoric experiences. So that is openness.
Perfect way of describing it. So
Okay.
it is how open you are to new experiences. For example, I'm a classic high open experience person. Look, I've worked as a UX designer, musician, almost became a doctor, studied psychology, but didn't complete it. When touring internationally as a musician. So I'm a classic high openness to experience. What would you define as a low openness to experience?
Me or everyone else?
Anybody? Not anybody? What would you describe as a person who is low to openness and experience?
Someone who does the same thing over and over again.
And is happy doing it. So when we look at openness of experience, right, there's a certain element that from what I'm recognizing, right? Like how openness can perceive as unpredictability, lack of focus, and are risking, I am more likely to engage in risky behaviors. So these are very important elements that are very important.
So you're definitely really, really high on openness, like Ethan.
I'm super high, but I'm also super straightforward. So Jeffers actually added in the straightforward, prefers familiarity, may not express emotions openly, down to earth. Actually, the may not express emotions openly is the other part, which is extraversion scale. The down to earth part, absolutely for low openness to experience. So we always talk about the pragmatic and data driven. Does this make sense? If we map this to StrengthsFinder or Emergenetics, how would this kind of map?
I suspect that openness would be the more divergent thinking, right? So yeah, ideation, strategic. I'm guessing people
Conceptual, more conceptual thinking also.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because then the opposite is the structural, right, which is more guidelines driven. In that sense, I prefers guidelines, prefer some structure,
consistency and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Consistency, absolutely.
Yep. So consistency, discipline, maybe.
Yep. Responsibility. That might actually go down to conscientiousness, so that might be another topic.
Yeah.
I get that way. But I'm also thinking that people with context, so people who take more reference from the past than the future might be a little bit more towards the
Is it counter? Is futuristic and context?
Technically, you can have both context and futuristic up front in your top 5.
Oh, you can put.
Yeah, you can have both. So what it means is that this person thinks both in terms of past and future.
Wow.
But if someone says they...
So never in the present.
Sometimes that should. Sometimes that could be. The other thing is, for example, if someone has context high and futuristic low, right? And maybe the other things like discipline, consistency high, and ideation or this low, then maybe that will also swing the openness, right? Because CliftonStrengths isn't a spectrum. It's not opposite ends. So context and futuristics are not opposite ends. And then
isn't consistency and individualization kind of opposite ends?
No, you can have both.
No, consistency is fairness, right?
Consistency
It's
is
more
about
fairness
and about SOP so that people can follow. So we have seen people who have seemingly opposite talent teams. I say seemingly because they are not opposite. Right. So context and futuristic are not opposite.
Very interesting. This is I'm learning new things about strengths.
Not heard this before? Okay. So adaptability and discipline are not opposites. Right. Adaptability and discipline are not opposites.
Okay.
So we have had people who come and then they go like, when they understand why they feel internal conflict and they look at their talent teams, then they understand why. So I've had someone, so I'm going to take a little bit of time and talk about strengths.
Yeah.
Right. So one of I was doing a workshop and I had this lady. She had activator and adaptability. So when she was looking at her report, she went like, oh, this strengths thing, is it something that you're trained to do, you have to do, or is it natural to you? Say, okay, tell me more. Sometimes I feel like I need to get things done, but I don't feel like I want to get things done. I want to do something else. Like, okay, so the getting things done is very obvious, right? It's activator. She wants to kickstart things, but she feels frustrated that she has to kickstart things. Why? So I asked her, what would you rather be doing instead of getting things started? I'd just like to kick back, relax, and go with the flow. So immediately I just took her report. I asked the whole table, which talent team do you hear her saying? Everybody said adaptability, also obvious. So when she first encountered her profile, she was like, this thing not very accurate. When I look at activator, I think about my adaptability. I don't really want to start things. When I look at my adaptability, then I think also don't always go with the flow. I want to get things moving. Right, so she kept looking at the other talent team instead of what the talent team she had as a contradiction. But once she recognized that she had both and both were active in her, she understood where her conflict was coming from. That she actually had two aspects of herself, one wanting to go the flow and one with a need to get things started.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, but keep going.
And so what we needed to do with her was to actually help her to understand which context does she need to use which one more, so that she can bring and express her best self in the suitable context. And that's what I like about strengths, right? Because they're not opposites, and sometimes these seemingly opposite ones can give you that insight.
So this is also counter to the lexical approach which Big Five uses, which is that you are either or, you're not, or you're in the middle somewhere and confused. So that's kind of where the lexical approach is very different from what you're just talking about.
Yep. And I think MBTI is also opposites, right? So
yeah, it is
feeling extrovert or introvert.
But the wonderful thing about this is also that we also go back to the fact that a lot of this are dependent on, because we also talk about like the difference between emergenetics and strengths, right? Like strengths is how it comes out, even though emergenetics might be talking about how you're thinking about it, like how you even got there in the first place, your tendencies and your thought processes. So this is where I find it very fun because the lexical approach can be a very fundamental, automatic, instinctive approach that you're brought up from your shadow self, which I can bring back to our topic with Jeffeth. And then, but at the same time, your coping mechanisms and your different adjustment methods might create your strengths, which is exactly what might have happened with this lady with adaptability as well as activator. I think this is why this conversation is fun.
See, you learn something new. I'm so glad.
I'm always learning something new from these sessions, even though it might be like, oh my God, like we have to do this. Yeah, sometimes. Great. So conscientiousness. So this is where discipline comes back into the picture, it seems. So because if you look at the simple questions, right? I have excellent ideas. I'm quick to understand things. Openness to experience, right? It actually is indicative by your abstractions and your conceptual ideas, which Jeffeth got like spot on, right? Like this is conceptual thoughts. This is abstract ideas. So these people have very strong imaginative ideas and all this kind of stuff. So the sample questions actually give you a very good insight, as to how these thought processes work. Conscientiousness, again, it goes back to discipline. Dutifully strive for achievement and measures or outside expectations, which people control, regulate, and direct impulses. So because high conscientiousness often perceived as stubborn and focused, low conscientiousness is associated with flexibility and spontaneity, but it can also be appeared as sloppiness or lack of reliability. So the reason why I didn't like Week 5 is because I scored low on conscientiousness, and the way they wrote it was saying that I was sloppy, rather than saying flexible and spontaneous, which I was like, wait, can't you say both at the same time? Because again, right, the approach in which the current form of Big 5, which includes this report, this one, once you do this test, you'll get such reports. It actually judges your conscientiousness, your openness to experience, according to whether is it good or bad, in the way they write it. Which also comes into the problem because with emergent ethics and strengths, you usually have a coach to go through this with you, usually have somebody to go through this process with you, but with, and there's a very positive coaching aspect. Big 5 has almost like a, this is your personality, stick by it kind of approach when you read the reports. Don't take my word for it, read the reports. When I read the reports, that's what I felt when I first went through it. I think this is why I had a lot of struggles with Big 5 personality, because like it's like MBTI, introversion, extraversion is not a bad thing, right? Thinking, feeling is not a bad thing, right? So that's where the struggle for me when I was looking at this. But the good part is the people who actually practice it well in the Big 5 actually talk about it being spontaneous versus focused. Which, if we go back to emergent ethics, it's the same thing, right? High adaptability and flexibility versus high focus.
Instead of calling you sloppy, right?
Yes.
We usually call first, third, third, right? But then there's also another one that the distinction is like, because all personality tests are self-rated, in that sense, right? So this is what you prefer, but the other part where it looks sloppy, that one is the impact on others. And it could be, the impact could be, that means how people view you, right? Rather than you view yourself. You don't view yourself as sloppy unless you start judging yourself frequently.
I can do my hand this way, sloppy hand.
Yeah, you're so self-assured, you will never name that sloppy.
It's just me, guys.
But I thought the perceived impact one is more of how people perceive you, and that gives you a sort of another data point about actually how are you showing up to other people.
That's great.
Which is the important part of feedback, right? That people give you that data point. Because you self-rate yourself, but you have no awareness of how other people see you.
So I have a question for Ethan, right? And this just came to mind. So in terms of the way the profiles are structured, like CliftonStrengths is not on a spectrum. So the comparison is kind of like, I love to get things started versus I love data. Which one sounds more like you? So they're not opposites, and sometimes it can be, it's
preference. To me, it's just preference, right? Like preference. Right.
But when we talk about it in terms of a scale, we find that a person who loves to have ideas often think they are not very good with ideas.
Yes.
Or a person who is very detailed often think they are not detailed enough. So they often rate themselves lower than what they really are on a scale, right? So in that sense, people, if it's the profile like Big 5, which is on a scale, versus CliftonStrengths is preference. I think preference is a little bit easier, but on a scale, because you are evaluating yourself on a scale, you tend to not have that self-awareness, or you tend to downplay.
It depends. It all goes back to self-awareness, right? Because a high self-aware person, these are all not problems.
I mean, okay, but
we're talking about low self-awareness people, which is the majority of people who will be taking the test because that's why they're taking a test.
Yeah. Okay. So
I hear your context. Yes.
Yeah. So in that case, you compare when someone takes a Big 5, I think that probably most people skew it a little bit more to the
Conservative.
the conservative.
Or their own neurotic. Okay, so I'll go back to their own neuroticism, right? It's like, okay, so I deal with this a lot. People who say that they're okay. So I know a person who's like a millionaire who still feels that he doesn't have enough money.
Uh-huh.
Right? I deal with people who have $1,000 in the bank account and feel that they're the richest guy in the world.
Okay.
So when we talk about this, I think this is where the tendency to display self-discipline, the tendency, like what they focus on in their lives. So for example, I'm always prepared. I like to always prepare myself. I get chores done right away. Can be like it's right away is almost like a misnomer, right? Because right away it can be 5 minutes later, can be 2 days later. I mean, of course, usually 2 days later is too far away, but for a sloppy person, yeah. But again, right, I think this is where the expectation, I guess, is of self-awareness whenever this kind of tests are being meted out, which I think is also a struggle with dealing with personality tools or psychometric profiles, is that it depends on the self-awareness of the person. Whereas, like you talk about StrengthsFinder, right? It's just a preference thing. So you can always say what you prefer, which is actually easier and a little bit different. But at the same time, a person at work would prefer things differently from a person at home. So this is also where I prefer to chill. Right? I prefer to draw art than to read data, for example. I mean, that's not a StrengthsFinder question. But like these kind of questions would be dependent on what scenario I'm in. So then the question here is, okay, with because the moment we go into self-assessed things, right? I agree with you. The problem here is, as long as it's self-reported, there's going to be a bunch of issues with this, especially if the person is low self-awareness.
I mean, which is also why after they do the test, we usually ask whether people agree, right? That's why you have a debrief, right? And then there are people who disagree as well. But then you explore that conversation, lah.
So I guess my question is, I know we've talked about self-awareness and the impact of self-awareness on profile. So assuming that people have low self-awareness, what's the impact of someone with low self-awareness taking a profiling tool that's lexicon-based, like this one that's on a bar, versus one that's like StrengthsFinder or CliftonStrengths, which is not lexicon-based?
Remember the lady that you talked about with the adaptability and the activator? Yeah. She felt that her test results were not there. Was not right. Was not her.
Shows up in the test result, is it?
Yeah. That's the beautiful part. But she still disagrees with it. If not for the coach, if not for other people feedback, if not for all the conversations around it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I mean, it shows up and then becomes a point of conversation. But if you do big five, does it show up?
It shows up because lexical means it's still a conversation topic. Conscientiousness is still a conversation topic. It is either you are or you aren't. Right? And then you can go, no, I'm very conscientious. I do this. Look at me. I'm actually a very conscientious person. Why you say I'm not conscientious? Why does that say I'm not? It's still a talking point. I think the approaches are different.
But I suspect that a person who thinks they are very conscientious would end up having a high conscientious score. Anyway, even if
yes. And that's where the so if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy and the person says I'm highly conscientious and other people go like, no, not at all, you're missing out all the points.
That's when you need an external party to come in.
Isn't that the same for me, isn't it the same for a StrengthsFinder somewhat? Like for me, then Big Five is a better understanding of your self-impression.
Okay, so you see, in Big Five, if you say that I'm high in conscientiousness, whereas I may not be as high as I think I am, I need someone who knows me well enough to refute and give me a counter example. In CliftonStrengths, it's in the report. As a coach, I don't need to have prior experience. I don't need to know your behavior. I can look at it and I can have that. You know what I mean? The type of conversation and the way we get there is very different.
I hear you. Then I'll put Big Five as a self-impression test.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I'm just trying to piece where each of these come together based on the way it's structured differently. So when we look at it, we kind of know how it's used differently.
Why I enjoy this conversation, let me just wrap up that this level of conversation really well. This makes Big Five a very good self impression test, like your self image of who you think you are. Because if you look at the things, right, I'm always prepared. There's no questions like other people tell me I am. I don't know. I no, actually in the test itself, they have those elements. So, but the example here is I like order, I follow a schedule, I'm exacting in my word. Right? Have you met a person who actually doesn't follow a schedule but say that they follow a schedule?
Yeah.
You have met a person like this?
Who don't follow a schedule and say they do?
Yeah.
Actually, not often lah, but got.
Yeah. So then the person is abysmally low on self-awareness, and you learn their self-image of what they are like as a person in their world from this test results. This is where I would disagree using this as a way of deciding whether a person should get a job. Again, we remember this, our psychometric test should not be used to decide whether a person gets a job. Full stop. This is a universal thing, right? Like we talked about this even for StrengthsFinder. Don't use it as a blanket scale to try to get people a job. It just gives you a talking point to start having a conversation whether a person's a culture fit, is a skills fit, or whatever from there. This is a great talking point to me of the person's self-image. If the person lies all the way through, I love it. It tells me exactly where the person is. The thing is, I'm very honest about the way I look at the world, right? So I would say that I have very low conscientiousness because I'm not trying to, like, I'm not always trying to measure my successes. I'm not trying to deal with outside expectations. I'm trying to do it my way and my approach of doing things, my preferred way of doing things. But the thing is that, do I still get things done? Yes. Most people who work with me know that I still get things done. But am I conscientious? No. Again, this is where the structure of this really goes on. I'm low in conscientiousness, but that's because I'm always thinking about new ways and improving systems to become more spontaneous and more effective.
So Ethan, I think because from the original definition, it says consciousness is the tendency, right, to display. It some sort embedded the certain preference of how often you do it or not do it. But I think because later on it was the result came as either low or high. You have no, you just can't help but put some kind of negative or positive connotation just by the language itself after that.
Especially if you use the word sloppiness.
Yeah. I mean, even low or high, right? If you forget this test after a while, you go back to low or high, you need to go back to think again. On its own, you get reminded, oh, it's either bad or good lah.
I think for me, okay, so this is me. I'm not speaking for anybody else. When I have low on conscientiousness, for me, the first thing that goes through my mind was, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm very careless. Yeah, okay, you can. Yeah, so that's my first reaction. But it's when they put sloppiness involved in this, I'm like, whoa. And lack of reliability. Whoa. Right? Like, what, like, it's like, I'm flexible, I'm spontaneous. Lack of reliability is a very different story from that.
So I guess embedded into the way Big Five describes people is that the higher, the better, the lower, the worse off you are. So there's kind of a, almost like an embedded
bias.
I think not in its original definition, which is the measure of a tendency, but once they start to label high or low, you just can't help but think higher might be better or lower might be better lah. It's just semantics, right? Or just language.
I think the other thing is that because I read it on the GitHub versions, the final reports come with the negative connotations in the reports.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Actually, why don't we give Joanna some time since she's done it before in terms of the impression she has of the Big Five last time. I know you did a long time ago, and then how does that compare with your impression of, like, say, CliftonStrengths, since you have experience of both?
I can't really remember like the ones that I've seen, whether they had like a negative connotation for low. But I do recall like generally it has just to be phrased as like a tendency for doing things rather than like something that really defines you. And then also because I think maybe like because for example, there are people who are lower in conscientiousness who will indeed be sloppy. And research has also found that people who are higher in conscientiousness tend to do better at their studies. So there is sort of like a link there. But that's also, but at the same time, there's like the whole point about flexibility. So actually each of these like big five aspect is like can be broken down into smaller facets. So I think like this one conscientiousness like covers actually a few sort of like smaller subsets, which is maybe why there's a kind of like a difference. Like maybe some things are really like if you are less like lower discipline is like not really a good thing. But of course flexibility is a good thing. So there are like different ways to see it, I think.
So I think this is where it's interesting, right? Because I make up for my lack of discipline with passion. So I study harder and faster than everybody else because I make up for the fact that I'm bloody lazy. So or very flexible, right? So that's the other part of this equation, right? Like so the key part here is that because once we look at results, which again, right, Jeffers was talking about impressions, all these kind of things. There is greater tendency, but high conscientiousness is not necessarily better. It also means anal retentiveness. It also means rigid, right? But see, it's interesting because the words are already biased, right? Stubborn and focused is very different from sloppiness and lack of reliability. Very different levels of conversation. If they put rigidity and inflexibility as a talking point, meaning like basically unable to deal with the situation, not adaptable, it actually gets closer to an equal kind of weightage in terms of wordings versus stubborn and focused. Focused is a very good word. And then you have the other side, which is sloppiness and lack of reliability. And
in that case, what would be like a better way to describe sloppiness?
So it can be less. Okay, so less conscientious usually relates back to like a little bit careless. Can be careless. Can miss out details.
It's a nicer way of saying sloppy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't it sloppy? But okay, for example, if you're in a lab, okay, it depends on who is the one that crafted the words and the sentences, right? And the connotations that it invokes. So you get you have a neuroticism regarding the word sloppiness in this particular definition of conscientiousness. Why is that so? Why
for me?
that particular word? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going back to this, right? So I'm saying that the weightage of the words on the negative and positive side, of the high and low side, the weightage of the words are very different. In the colloquial definitions, these lack of reliability and sloppiness at work, and because this was used for work purposes, has very negative consequences versus stubborn and focused.
Right. So if you're in a lab environment, for example, and you are to do work as a scientist, example, right?
Mm-hmm.
A sloppy scientist is one that doesn't take the right way of doing things. And there is a proper methodology in getting things done.
Okay.
And so it's a sloppy way of things. Sorry.
As a person who worked in the lab before as well.
Yeah.
So for me, okay, I'm not sloppy in the lab. I am not conscientious. But when the steps require me to be conscientious, I will be. But the key part here is that I'm also the person who's able to figure out when the results are not turning out the way it is. I'm able to be flexible with, we are not getting this, we can do this instead.
Right.
So for example, within the science lab, right, you require all the multiple facets. For example, a principal investigator tends to be less conscientious than the lab technician. Just to specifically talk about the tendencies of the personality.
Right. So you're talking that you're referring to the fact that a certain role place a greater importance on a particular attribute.
Yes.
Okay.
And therefore, to use the word sloppy So because if you look at the way that this whole sentence is phrased, it's high conscientiousness, self-discipline, act dutifully, strive for achievements, measures against measures of outside expectations. High conscientiousness is often perceived as being stubborn or focused. It's associated with flexibility and spontaneity. They could have ended it there, and then they went here.
Okay.
I think what Ethan is saying is that embedded into the big five is
Bias.
yeah, it's a bias that higher is better than lower.
Yes.
Whereas what Ethan is saying is that look, when it's low, there are also certain, for lack of a better word, strengths of being low, right? So a low conscientiousness in big five can be seen as flexible and spontaneous. So if you look at a CliftonStrengths report, it's seldom phrased negatively because it's based on positive psychology, right? So if you look at spontaneity and flexibility, CliftonStrengths should be adaptability, right? But we hardly in the strengths language say that, adaptability, you are sloppy. We don't do that, right? Because the whole thing about strengths is that because it's based on positive psychology, there's a positive bias. Whereas what Ethan is saying is that this one has kind of a
Negative connotation.
Yeah, negative connotation is low. When it's low, it means it's bad. That's what he's saying. Whereas in strengths, nothing is bad, right? So everything has the potential to, every talent team is a potential to be effective.
Yep. I mean, I'm saying this with the same breath as the fact that they say, openness to unpredictably, a lack of focus. I mean, the thing about this is that dogmatic and close-minded. Over here, this is kind of okay, but when it comes to here, for some weird reason, the language cues, and because this is actually related to the official language of the reports itself, which is the more interesting part for me. It's like, why are you skewing it this way? There is versus, okay, StrengthsFinder is very sensitive to this. Emergenetics is very sensitive to this. And I'm finding Big Five very, very callous with this, which is very, very not conscientious.
Is it because it was developed much earlier?
No, this was developed in if you look at the development cycle, right?
It's 1980s, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not too long ago as compared to MBTI.
So the sensitivity to the language and the usage is very, very strange.
For anyone who takes Big Five, then it's helpful for that person as they're looking at it to also, I guess, not beat themselves up if they get a low score on certain things, but to recognize that it's a reflection of who they are, their tendencies, and how those tendencies can also be useful, right? So in strengths, we talk about raw and mature talent teams, how they use. We talk about blind spots if you don't have a talent team. So that's why I like CliftonStrengths, right? It's designed in a way that you know how to deal with it in a positive and effective manner. Whereas this one is almost like you've kind of given a death sentence that you don't quite know what to do with it.
I think the thing is, it's like, because I think in principle it wants to measure tendency, but because of the way they label the language, you just can't help but feel your emotions just get triggered now. When I did neuroticism, right, and I scored low. Like, my first question is, am I neurotic? Then before I even go to the definition, that's the first meaning that came to my head. Like, am I neurotic? No, I cannot be neurotic. I must find some ways to make myself score higher. So in itself is a bit of that. It's like, is this tool like trying to judge me, kind of that feeling. Yeah.
And actually, I guess because there's that bias and slant, it's easier to game the profile, right?
It is.
A lot easier than, simply because strengths is framed as everything's good. You're just trying to assess what it is. Whereas this is almost framed like high is good and low is bad.
I'm always prepared. Like, if a person is trying to game my interviewer, right, and I'm trying to do this for a job, I just say yes to all the good stuff, lah.
Yeah, which is very easy to game, right? Compared to some other profiling tools. that doesn't give you a evaluation. Thanks, Faith. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming down. Yes, one has a self-interview. Yes. Great. Let's go on with the next part, extraversion. So it's always about okay, so this goes back to the MBTI definition of extraversion, which again is very Jungian, very way of looking at it. It's always about social engagement and as well as breadth of activities in terms of like going out there, high visibility, talk, assertion. Whereas introversion is meant to be low-key, deliberate, less involved with social world.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very negative though.
Yeah, no. Extraversion is not a good or bad thing, interestingly.
Okay.
Yeah.
People won't have gripes around this. The language just seems neutral, okay.
Here looks very
Yeah.
neutral. Here, like I'm the life of the party. I do not mind being the center of attention. So this is something that is very interesting also because even the definition here is a little bit different from MBTI. Because the concept about exertion is something that MBTI does not talk about. MBTI talks more about gaining energy from interacting with people.
Mm.
So
Yep.
this is where like they even have behavioral traits within the topics here.
Like the expressiveness, right?
Yep.
And then assertiveness also. Assert themselves.
Yep.
But while I guess the focus is different in MBTI, the description seems to be quite cross-applicable.
Not really, because MBTI by right, a lot of extroverts that I know are not assertive people. Not necessarily.
More often than not?
More often, they just like to hang around people.
Okay.
So the idea of extraversion seems closer to this version of it, which is Big Five version, than it is with the MBTI version. Does this make sense? Like the idea of extraversion, it's a very behavioral trait. I'm the life of the party. I do not mind being the center of attention. I start conversations. I talk to a lot of people at parties. I do not talk a lot. Right? So these are very behavioral tendencies.
Mm.
So yeah, I think this is the interesting part for me because again, when we talk about this, it's not about where you gain your energy from. It's about energy creation. It's about interaction. It's about all these kind of different things, often perceived as full of energy. So this is a very behavioral trait versus the way the MBTI does it. Then we talk about agreeableness, right, which Alex is the number one king of. Super high on this, okay? Very high score.
Sometimes.
Right, harmony. The word harmony comes in for this. So am I considered an agreeable person? Daniel just shook his head. Come on, Daniel, why?
You're opinionated. You have opinions and expressions of what you're thinking. It doesn't mean that you're not agreeable, but the level and tone of agreeableness is different.
Absolutely. Like, so I'm actually quite middle ground lower for agreeableness when I did this test. But what's really interesting is disagreeable individuals place self-interest above getting along with others, which is not quite true for me. I'm usually trying to get conversations going. My extraversion is very clear. So, but at the same time, even if I'm trying to create disagreements, I'm actually trying to get people along at the same time. So this is where like the struggle of this term agreeableness and the definition of it kind of struggles for me. But I have to agree, if I use the word harmony, which is the StrengthsFinder definition, I'm definitely not anywhere near harmony.
Yeah, you have self-assurance.
Yes, super high. If I have self-assurance plus harmony in my top 5, I think I'll be very confused. So this is very interesting, right? Leaders with high levels of agreeableness are more likely to be considered transformational than transactional.
Actually, I thought it's quite interesting. So I don't think Ethan is generally like, he doesn't agree with everything with people, but he has the ability to disagree agreeably. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the way that he talks, he would disagree with people, but he does it in a very nice way most of the time, unless he
But that
doesn't
could be
agree.
that could be capability, ma. It's developed, ma. It's a skill, ma.
Yeah, but am I agreeable? Meaning, okay, so here comes the interesting part about the word agreeable, right? Concern with social harmony. So I value getting along with others. Okay, so what's really interesting is that considerate, kind, generous, trusting, trustworthy, helpful, and willing to compromise their interests with others. I'm very giving in general, but at the same time, I can disagree with you.
Yeah, so I thought it's interesting because when Daniel said, because you're opinionated, I'm wondering whether a person is agreeable or not, is it linked to how opinionated a person is? I mean,
I think it's closer to extraversion, expression of emotions for me. Because if I'm high agreeable plus according to this low in extraversion, I'm more likely to go
That's also because you third flexibility lah. If you have first third very focused, then the opinions would be forget it, whatever, right? Then or take much longer to convince you lah. But because of your expressiveness, I would say you naturally want to just share whatever you think is right. Now nothing wrong with being expressive, but so
this is why it's very interesting, right? Because then this is where the lexical hypothesis and separation of these different traits is very interesting for me. Because I might think for the wellness of others, let's look at the questions, right? I feel little confident for others. I don't feel like this is agreeableness, by the way.
yes, but that's the definition of agreeableness, is it? Or...
Yeah. This doesn't look like the agreeable of the general concerns for social harmony. I can be very empathetic towards other people without being agreeable. If you look at this, right, it's a very huge question mark because for me, even the big five going through these questions confuses me somewhat.
I'll just peg you as midpoint and then I'll move on.
Cool. This is why I'm very interested in everybody's results after this. And then I like this. Okay, so the thing is that because Big Five is so well studied, but the thing is that because it's lexical and it's only 5 factors, unlike, we talk about StrengthsFinder or the rest, right, which have a lot more factors at play and a lot more interactions at play, it's way more studied than a lot of other tests. But at the same time, I'm not sure whether the test is very useful. So it's talking about somebody who is from Asian military unit. Right? Somebody revealed that he's Asian military unit, right? Singapore is considered Asian, right?
Mm.
Yeah, right. So with high level agreeableness, more likely to receive a low rating for transformational leadership skills. Is this something that is felt from experience in terms of when a person is more concerned about others and more agreeable, they're viewed as lousy and weaker in transforming the company or transforming the organization?
I think if you look at it from an SAF point of view, I actually agree with it.
Because in the SAF, they view that the more argumentative you are, the better you are in transforming people.
Yeah, because they just want someone who... Yes, I do think so. So if you look at the SAF culture, it's the people, it's like the dog that... Okay, I don't mean to insult people by using the word dog, but the dog that barks the loudest?
Yes.
So it's a little bit like that. And people who kind of like just agree are seen out like doormats.
I'm very curious about the person actually from there.
Daniel?
Was, you mean?
Yeah.
It has actually a lot of experience from them. Yeah.
Do you agree
Well,
this?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
Is that where you're ending your sentence from? Like, that's the end of your comment?
No. Well, okay. you're trying to draw me out in terms of understanding more, appreciate that. But in terms of agreeableness, it depends on the hierarchy. Right? And it depends on where you are in the hierarchy. If you are a foot soldier, agreeableness is highly desirable. Whereas if you are a commander, you may not want to be agreeable all the time. You may want to counter with your own ideas, which is why being opinionated in some instances is very helpful. It gives alternatives to a solution. But as a foot soldier, you don't want everybody in your battalion to come and tell you their own story or their own view. You never get things done.
So this is very interesting, right? Because the study of let's go back to this. High leaders with high levels of agreeableness are more likely to receive a low rating for transformation leadership skills, which actually actually fits what he just said, right? Because leaders, right? We're talking about leadership level. You need to be less agreeable, have opinions to be able to rise in the higher ranks.
Yes, but you must do that very diplomatically. Keyword being diplomatically, and it's not shown here at all.
Yeah. So this
diplomacy and tech. Yeah.
This does not represent any of that part lah.
Yeah.
And the context that Daniel just gave about, like foot soldiers needing to be able to be good followers, that's what I'm hearing. So, but that particular trait that you're talking about is not for transformational leadership skills, right? Which is the context of this sentence. So if you were to rate, even foot soldiers, right, who are very agreeable, would you rate them high for transformational leadership skills?
No.
Because that's the
yeah. So that's exactly why I was saying what he said kind of agrees with what the statement here was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you need to be of lower agreeableness, in order for you to have a difference in opinion and have opinions to give alternatives to be able to be on a higher in the higher level in the framework. I think because maybe in other cultures, non-Asian cultures, most people are not highly agreeable. Because that's actually something that was like Asian cultures are more agreeable than other cultures. This is something from Hofstede research as well, right? We are highly agreeable. So maybe that's why Asian military units require people to be less agreeable, because in general, people are already more agreeable here.
Okay.
So in cultural context.
Yeah, cultural, and because I have a naturally negative bias to SSEF. So
that's fine. Yeah. So, but I mean, I think this is where like it's useful to look at this in a very interesting approach, because again, this is the good thing about Big Five. It's also a bad thing about Big Five, which is that it's so highly researched and utilized in so many places, but the context keeps changing. Once you don't put it into cultural context and understanding the situations, it's very hard to understand it without the cultural understanding, the context into the, like, only because I know Hofstede, I can tell you that because of the cultural index related to agreeableness of the people on the ground in these countries, therefore I can tell you why this context might work. That's why research like this kind of feels out of context for me. And the research kind of loses my interest. But let's go to the favorite last part, which is neuroticism. So yes, this is actually where Joanna was actually perfectly on point. Emotional stability. So Jefford, it's good that you're not neurotic.
So this one, the lower is the better.
Yes, the lower the better in terms of less emotionally reactive. Low on neuroticism, I less easily upset and less emotionally reactive.
So quite interesting, right? One domain like extraversion is more neutral. Then suddenly you went to neuroticism, which has a straight
negative point of view about.
Yeah.
And there's a very clear bias of emotional regulation. You need to have better emotional regulation. So this is why Big Five is very confusing for me. When I look at crossword, it's like, wait, why is this down? And then it's like, wait, no, that's not a bad thing. But when you go up to, okay, sorry, I'm just going to go back up to conscientious. You go down is a bad thing. You're sloppy and lack of reliability. But then over here, when you're high, it means you're neurotic and you're likely to go depressed.
Which makes it very hard, right? Because on one hand, you say your personality too is for your self-awareness, but you can't help but bring in judgment by the very fact of how you were being assessed in the first place.
Yes.
And the people who you share the report, oh, my neuroticism score is very low. I mean, what kind of impression do you want to share this kind of info with someone else?
Yes. On its own, without the context, without people knowing what this score is.
Yeah, are you neurotic? Or maybe you high, people will think you're neurotic, and then you low, also people.
Yeah, if you say you're low on neuroticism, it might think that you're neurotic. If you say high on neuroticism, people might still think you're neurotic. Then either way, you're neurotic. What? If nobody knows the results, if nobody knows how to read the Big Five results. Which is why this is a very confusing set of tests for me. Again, it's the most popular and most used.
Well, it's probably because it's free, right?
It's open source, it's free for everybody to use. So people are using it left, right, center.
And worse, maybe they're not using it correctly and can probably cause more damage.
I think this is also where the real topic really comes right into the picture, right? Because it's highly researched, but there's very little coaching and developmental elements actually built into the Big Five within itself. Right? When we talk about Enneagram, there's always a growth path that's talked about for Enneagram. When you talk about strengths, there's raw, there's mature, there's basement balcony, there's all these different elements that talks about developing a person. When emergent genetics is always about developing the person. When in Big Five, I'm like, now what? So this is where it's very interesting, right? Because it doesn't give me something to work from.
So in your report, like if let's say your neuroticism is high, low, right? Low is better, right? Or high?
Low is better.
Does it provide you any recommendations on what you can do?
So in the results that I got, 0. But that's because it was done by a GitHub recommendation, like a software. Again, so this is why I actually like emergent genetics and StrengthsFinder both on the grounds of it requires a paywall and it requires you to go through the modules properly in order for you to understand the information. This is also why I'm also quite okay with 16 personalities because it's still positive psychology based-ish 16 personalities website. But original MBTI, you need to go through a coach, go through proper debriefing, proper everything. Big Five for me is like, I
have a question on the neuroticism statement, right? So
yes.
Just now when you're scrolling up, I saw a statement that says that it's different from the psychological definition of being neurotic.
The original term, is it? Here.
Yeah. So where can you go back to the description? Okay. So the last sentence, right? Neuroticism is similar but not identical to being neurotic in the Freudian sense, which is neurosis. So maybe
Freudian is different from psychological. So
okay.
It's a Freudian version. Joanna, would you like to share?
Oh, I'm not familiar with the Freudian version of neurosis.
Okay, so original Freudian version of neurosis is just specifically how in touch with reality you are. So by the time you are at the border of neurosis into psychosis, neuroticism defines you as losing touch with reality.
Okay, so that's the Freudian definition.
Yes.
Then the psychology definition is?
Neurosis is related back to like OC traits, obsessive compulsive traits.
Okay.
Or like anxiety related general depression, mood disorder traits.
Which is similar to this one.
Yeah, which is similar to this one.
Okay.
Would you describe neuroticism as intensity of a particular tendency?
I would, okay, so there's a definition of emotional instability according to DSM. So I'm going to use that because that's the psychological definition in terms of psychiatry, because that's why I'm trained in. Previously, I was trained in psychiatry. Emotional instability is actually the inability to maintain or regulate your emotions to maintain relation to the current situation.
So there's a disassociation with the current situation?
Yes. So like, for example, I'm going to go to a fit of rage, right? The reaction is disproportional to the stimulus. That's emotional instability. So somebody sneezes, you start getting angry and start whacking the person. That's emotional instability.
Okay, so like in the news, right? There's this healthcare worker that the neighbor been like, I don't know, splashing, basically it became a court case, right? So that person, would you say, classified under this?
Only if it's consistent and only if this is like disorder level, then we call it neurosis officially.
Like no badge lah, for example, right?
Yeah. No badge is classic neurosis.
Okay.
But that wasn't instability, right?
She is completely unstable. She is okay. She is the manipulate. Okay, so for the so she was clearly triggered and angry. She just masks it very well with this face, right? So she gave that face, but you can tell that she's triggered by her micro expression. She's clenched. She's everything. She's angry at everybody. And at the same time, she's trying to create a condescending look at the same time. So it's like you can tell that she's emotionally unstable. She might be if she was completely cold about the situation, even if going to the court, which a natural response would be to feel nervous, to feel worried, and she feels no emotions, she might have psychosis. That means lost track of reality.
Okay, so using all the Singapore examples, right? So there's this other very famous incident that was along the show me your badge lady. It's the lady who goes around showing her handphone and asking people what race they are. Right?
Neurosis.
So that is closer to, okay.
So a lot of paranoia, a lot of, we were actually usually probably her what we term as cluster C personality disorder. So there is cluster A, B, C personality disorders. A being schizophrenic form personality disorder. That means they're losing track of reality. So J.R. Tolkien, the guy who wrote Lord of the Rings, falls within the schizotypal-ish personality disorder, meaning he can't relate to people because he's too lost in his own world, but he still can relate to people. So it's a disorder only because of the fact that he isolated himself from others, but he was still somewhat functional.
Right.
He hasn't lost touch with reality altogether. When he lost touch with reality, that's called schizo, right? Straight off the bat.
Which is psychosis.
Yes, which is psychosis.
Okay.
Cluster B, we call them the negative B words, like B words. But it's borderline, which is also known as emotional instability disorder, personality disorder, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial. So your drug addicts who are abusive, typical antisocial. Narcissist, histrionic, your stars, your people who are, oh, look at me, I'm the perfect person. Those kind of people. And then the borderline is your Korean drama mother-in-law. Everything is also huge. Oh my God, you took the wrong food back. I whack you.
So that's one of the advantages of having Ethan with us, right? Because he brings the whole psychiatry aspect of things to the understanding of the profiling tools and the descriptions, which I thought was actually very interesting because helps us to connect and understand that, look, when you use a term like this, many people understand it very differently, depending on background, understanding, or what they've been exposed to, right? So in this particular case, neuroticism for Big Five describes when a person experiences a huge onset of that emotions. It doesn't talk very much about their ability to regulate the emotions, right? As long as they feel it. So let's say someone has the tendency to experience huge negative emotions, such as anger, anxiety, or depression, but is able to self-regulate and manage.
Okay, so here comes let me just highlight this sentence. Their negative emotional reactions tend to persist for unusually long periods of time. So I can feel the emotion. Okay, so as a Zen person, I can feel the emotion and let it go out. Right? As a very Zen person, I can feel and experience the negative emotions fully and let it out. The key part here about neuroticism is holding on to it.
So it's a lack of self-regulation.
But I agree with you that it does not within itself contain the concept of regulation, but this is a behavioral concept. So therefore, it cannot talk about emotional regulation on its own.
Because I'm thinking just the statement alone, the person might feel it, but then they can self-regulate or manage it. Then is that still considered neuroticism?
So that's the interesting part. By this definition, by right shouldn't be. By this definition, but by the questions, I'm not really getting it very clearly. Because a person who feels that, who regulates himself a lot, might feel that he gets irritated easily. A person who regulates him very well might feel like he stresses out very easily.
Yeah. It's like the swan, no? At the bottom, they're pedaling like mad. On the top, it's like, things
Super
are
graceful.
like this. Still can manage. So that's one not very clear to me in terms of, okay, so what does it really reflect when you say neuroticism is high or low? Doesn't include the regulation part of things.
I think this is why this Big Five has been so confusing for me. The definitions, because it's so open source, is not fixed to one source of truth, right? Like Gallup is in charge of the source of truth for StrengthsFinder, right? The research they've done, the analysis, the definitions, the explanations. Emergenetics very, very tightly controlled, right? Jefford, you cannot just anyhow rephrase the emergenetics definitions, right?
He's agreeing with you.
Yeah, I can, yes.
Can't rephrase.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is quite
use it.
high.
This almost seems okay. Sorry, okay.
Jefford first?
Oh no, I'm done.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Daniel?
I was gonna say that this sounds to me like chicken curry. Okay, to use an analogy, and it depends on which particular culture cooks a chicken curry. Is it a Chinese chicken curry, Malay, or Indian?
Yeah.
But the things you add in are the same. The turmeric, the galangal, the what have you, how much you intend to add, how much you don't. And if I cook chicken curry, if I'm a Chinese, that's good. But if my neighbor cooks Indian curry, I'm opposed to it and I hate the smell, but I'm eating chicken curry that I cook myself. It's like, I don't get this, Yeah.
And the analogy was to represent, sorry, what exactly?
The analogy is to say that this is a hodgepodge. There is, like you say, there is no control. And because there is no single source of truth, the reference datum shifts accordingly. So if I'm coaching someone on this,
it's very hard, right? It's very hard.
And it's not consistent, right? So you could approach, I mean, ideally, if you approach two Gallup certified strengths coaches, they'll give you the same definition and interpretation.
Yes.
They will coach you differently, right?
Yes.
But if you go to two different people who talk on Big Five, you could get two very different explanations of what those terms mean.
Because there's also no certification body for Big Five. There's also no proper, not from what I've researched so far. There's no, so again, this is just a test on its own. So if I see I'm a Big Five coach, there's no standardized training for this.
So my key question then is, what's the validity of the results?
So according to research, this is highly valid because this has been tested across multiple cultures. Okay, so they like there's the whole research part of this. Like they talk about gender differences, what are the different things. They say this is the most valid. So it's I don't know. Okay, so according to our tests in research, in psychology research, right? As long as something has been proven to be consistent and valid and can be proved over and over again, I'm not sure to what reference point, is considered valid and therefore true. But to what end?
So as much as it is considered very validated.
Look at the amount of research done into this,
Yeah, peer review, whatever it is. It doesn't, at least to me, seem as useful as some of the other profiling tools in terms of usefulness.
Yes. So that's why we also go back to the fact that there's a lot of people who actually say, as explanatory of so the other part about this is that there's actually a lot of discussions about the fact that there's a lot of methodological flaws within the model. And the key part here is that because it's not moving, and the other part about it is that StrengthsFinder Gallup regularly improves it. Emergenetics, I mean, because they even changed the word from fairness to consistency, right? They adapt it to different social contexts. They do it this way. This is what I do like about the ones with bodies that actually try to regulate it, try to manage the reactions of people, try to manage how people interpret it. The problem I have with Big Five is so open. It's almost like how Facebook was too open such that the privacy became a problem. Because it's open to so many interpretations, so many ways of looking at it, that is very hard to really be very clear. If you look at this, there's a lot of counter discussions on it, even in psychology. But again, this is one of the most used till today because it is open source. It's available for people to use. This is an honest thing, right? When we work in the labs in Singapore, and this is something that I came from experience. I've talked to a few friends also. Why is it that we use certain mice or certain type of fish or certain type of things, right? Availability and cheap. Not because it is the best, or not because it's a close analog to humans. This is one of the biggest problems that we do face in research. Because, I mean, would you be able to use StrengthsFinder for massive level research if you have to pay the amount of money to Gallup? Only if Gallup is the one funding it.
And I guess that's why, because it's open source, that you can have a lot of, it's called validations, right? Because it's Gallup will have their research, their internal research and all this, which of course I think proprietary and will not be released, right? I mean, for them or not release it to the whole world as well, because it's my proprietary research.
Yes.
So because of that, also it's been criticized that, hey, you know, I don't think there's enough research on Gallup. But personally, having used it, I like how the conversations that it generates, the bias towards positive psychology and things like that. So I'm biased towards it, right? But I see it as something that usability wise is a lot better for me.
Yeah, and I think this is why I think for coaching, I don't see Big Five as a very useful tool. I don't see it as a growth path. I don't see it as a useful, but it's a great way of assessing how a person views themselves.
Are you referring to the honesty component, or what are you referring to?
So they don't have to be honest. It's the self-image. So if my impression of the person is similar to the results, maybe the person's more honest with himself. If it's very far from the person's results. So like when I did my test, right? Alex, remember my test, that the emotional wellness test? I had created one 3 years back.
Yes.
I ran it at your sessions.
Yes. That's a long time ago.
It was designed with a feedback version so that I can tell whether you're lying.
Wow.
So take 3 of your closest people and then average the results. If it's 2 deviations away, you're confirmed lying, flip the score. So if you think you're highly well, but everybody thinks you're not, flip the opposite way.
So the test actually is done by you and your friends, is it? The one that you're talking about?
Yeah, so the one is done by you. But then the thing is that the one to help code out for other people, the thing is that because of PDPA and all these kind of different things, we cannot see the results of individuals and try to match them ourselves and try to build this out. So that's why we were supposed to build the module. We didn't build out in the end. But the design of the test, I had another test that was based on feedback from others. And internally, when we did it within our own team, it was accurate on point. The people who scored very high, but then everybody went low, clear. And when we flipped the score, it was accurate to what everybody's impression of the person was. So this is where like, I'm interested in. Like if I use a Big Five and I get other people to take the test of that person, so it'll be interesting.
I think I know that we kind of running out.
Starting to hit the
we have like 1 minute left, right? So one of the things that I thought was interesting as we talk about profiling and your self-awareness, we didn't really talk about the different types of selves, right? So there's the ideal self, the aspirational self. Then there's the self-image, which is how you see yourself. And then there's the, I think I don't know what I call it, your ego, is it? The who you really are.
The actual self.
It's the what?
The actual self.
Yeah, so the actual self, the self-image, and the ideal self, the three selves, right? Oftentimes that comes into play, that affects how we see us, the way we interact with each other, ourselves, and also the impact on the profiling tool.
The ego, the typical sense of the ego is called self-image.
Okay, so it's actual self, ego, and
ideal
self.
Aspirational self.
Aspirational self.
Yeah,
So-
because the typical ego is your self-image. So we usually, most people do what they do is they defend the self-image. So it's also, the other term for it is like identity, right? So if I identify myself as a Chinese Singaporean, I will protect the self-image of I am a Chinese Singaporean. You cannot shake me out from this. Like that's where identity politics start coming into play for people. Because the self-image and the label of all these things gives me my identity of self, and therefore sets my image that I portray to other people. So that's the self-image.
So
Whereas
I was thinking,
yeah.
Today is the last session. We're going to talk about profiling tools, right? So maybe one of the ways that we can close is, and I thought it was an interesting thing, is how the three selves impacts the way that we do
the test.
Yeah, the test.
Yeah, I'm very interested in knowing, like, because for me, I know that never put the aspirational self as the person taking the test, because you're definitely lying to yourself, right? So then, but how do you know the actual self? So this is where I think it's quite interesting, because I'm also curious about the self-image. I'm more interested in a person's self-image because other people can observe the actual self, right? Once you work with somebody long enough, you know what the actual self is like. You know the tendencies or whatever. But the self-image interaction with the actual self is what gives us the person's emotional reactions, the person's tendencies in the way they deal with people, especially the way they take feedback. If the self-image and actual self are very close, usually they take feedback very well. If they're very far apart, that's the high neuroticism appearing. Because they cannot take any challenges to their self-image, but the actual self challenges their self-image.
The dissonance, the differential is the dissonance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
They cannot take any challenges to their self-image, but the actual self challenges the self-image.
Yeah.
Sounds like they're caught in a loop.
Absolutely. I can give you a lot of examples of people that I've met who are like this.
Okay.
They cannot accept themselves, in other words.
Yes. So they're always getting triggered by themselves. So every time their actions take a step forward, and then they start going, oh, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with that? It's all your fault. It's da-da-da-da-da. They'll blame everything. But then they'll never take the responsibility as to they took the actions that led them to that position in the first place.
But in that case, aren't people like that also tend to be very self-critical?
There is a mixture.
Okay.
They might not ever blame themselves. They might blame everybody else.
Would you call it delusional?
Absolutely. And that's the opposite of the name of my company called Undelusional. But yes.
Okay.
Interesting.
I thought it's interesting to talk about the three selves, because sometimes when people answer it, the profiling tools always say, please rate yourself based on who you are currently, not who you wish to be. So that kind of tries to eliminate the aspirational self. But a lot of times, if you look at the questions, the way that they are phrased is that, I constantly think of great ideas.
There's a self-assessment. There's also a lot of judgment within the phrase within itself, right? There's an assessment of the quality of your ideas, right?
Yeah. And oftentimes, if I do that, whether or not I have great ideas, invariably is actually the gap between your ego, your self-image, and your aspirational self.
Perfect.
Right? So the gap of where those things are influences the way you take the profiling tool, which to me, that's where the biases come from, right? And a lot of times when someone, and that's why I like CliftonStrengths, right? Because it's not lexicon. And I always say that, hey, look, the person who is high command will never feel that they like control.
Because it's automatic.
Yeah, it's automatic, right? And it shows up. And very beautiful. And they'll say, anytime there's someone else capable of taking control, I let them take control. I've met so many people command when I confront them on that. They say, no, it's not that I want to take control. It's if there's someone else who can do it, they will do it. I'm very happy.
But it happened 6 weeks ago.
Huh?
It happened during action learning. No, it happened during action learning. One of the ladies, high command, top 5.
Yeah, could be. So it happens very frequently. So but I always ask the question, how often does that happen that you find someone capable of taking control? They'll say, seldom. Right, because the gap there, right? The bar and the reference point is so different. Someone with thinking talent teams like learner. So many of us have learner, right? We enjoy learning, but we often don't think that we are overlearning.
Huh? There's such a thing?
Other people are like, why do you like to keep reading and reading and reading and reading, right? So I think a friend even came to me to even use a Bible quote, right? I say, of books and learning, there is no end. I said, yeah, there's no end. I'm very happy about it. But
maybe that's why all of us in this space are all got learner. That's why
yeah, that's true.
All
got learner.
Yeah.
Top 10 for Daniel. But Daniel has maximizer, individualizer. He has all the different elements that.
So the beauty of CliftonStrengths is that when it comes out, it helps me to understand that there's that barometer is that way. And I don't find that like the Big Five actually gives you that self-awareness or the ability to bring it up as much. So yeah, so I just wanted to cover the three.
I love what you're talking about because actually there's an irony here, right? So previously when I was working on some unconscious techniques to do hypnotic techniques and understanding people's preferences and values. So when we spoke consciously of what we wanted, and then we actually did unconsciously what we actually desired, it's always flip around. Exact opposite. What we're conscious of and what we're unconsciously going for are completely different things. And this is why the actual self versus self-image is so important that we recognize that split. Because the moment you understand the difference, exactly on point, which is why StrengthsFinder immersion genetics is useful for me. Because it talks about tendencies that you can work from. It's already the way you look at the world. Whereas when I look at the Big Five, when I look at the questions and I look at the way that it's structured and the way they label things, it's almost like I value this. Look at me. This is me. Which I can't quite agree with.
So yeah, that was kind of all I wanted to add. And I think that the understanding of the three selves is very useful in our own development, whether we use profiling tool or not, but it just frames the way that we think and how we form our own identity, right?
Yeah, I will drop the link for the open psychometrics into the group chat here, as well as the Telegram later on, so that you guys can take your own Big Five and judge for yourself. Now that you heard us bash it, oops.
I mean, obviously, even as we do this, we all have our own biases, right? So this is...
I'm biased already, so I have to admit.
Yeah. So as we close, maybe we can just have, what we usually do, just go around and share about what your takeaways are. So I can go first, right? To me, I think my takeaway was the term about how the lexicon approach versus the non-lexicon approach, where we did a lot of comparison between, say, CliftonStrengths and MBTI and Big Five, and what the impact of that is. At least for me, it has become clearer. So that's my takeaway. Joanna?
I think for me, I really saw how for the Big Five, there's really that difference of like what is better and what is not so good. And at the same time, how like one word like agreeableness doesn't really cover the like sort of subsets that they're actually trying to cover, which I think is maybe kind of like a weakness. They try to simplify into a 5-factor model, but then there's the weakness of it becoming a bit like too generic factor-wise to cannot describe everything underneath it. Yeah, and then like comparing that with CliftonStrengths, I think CliftonStrengths, like the segregation of each team is a lot better.
Mm.
You remind me of a quote that I think it was Einstein who said, "Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler."
Yes.
Daniel?
But in my case, it was the fact that a lot of psychometric tools or even sociometric tools have certain buckets in which they want to put their tools. They structure it in a way that is applicable, similar to the Big Five. But in terms of those, it is more towards the positive psychology, like what you're saying. The choice of words tend to gravitate towards that. Whereas in this particular case, there are areas like neuroticism, which purposely puts it on the other extreme, where if you score high, it's bad. If you score low, it's good. And I'm just wondering, why is that the tendency? Because however this is formed, the choice of words, who governs the choice of words? And who says that these words are good and bad? And that is dangerous, because without that, you don't know whether someone is manipulating the system or not to give it a certain slant. And so I see that there's danger in implementing this or applying this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Use with caution. Lah.
Yeah. As in all things.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. Jeffers.
Similar, I think just reinforce the way of using language, right? When people are either doing the profile or interpreting the profile lah. And I mean all this while we've been talking about the usefulness of profiles, right? Usefulness of any profiling tool. So at an individual level, does it improve your own self-awareness and well-being? If you start being judgy about yourself after going through the profile, then maybe that's not a great tool lah, or you slap yourself with a lot of judgment, or you start to judge other people, like you use that tool or you neurotism, therefore I don't hire you, right?
You're high neurotic.
Yeah, and it's not good use of a psychometric tool to begin with lah. So but I think what I really appreciate is to see actually, because I've been using image genetics like first, third, second, third, right, quite frequent, but I get a contrasting sample from Big Five, and I know why there's so much impact in it, in just using that language. I'm glad at least like during my profile with Ethan and the group, it doesn't come across that way lah, that is non-neutral, and it come across as is well represented based on what EG also intended lah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think, so I'm just being appreciative that actually the impact of language does make a huge difference lah.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Joanna looks a bit confused. You know, EG is image genetics, the other profiling tool.
Okay, I'm not familiar with image genetics.
You can watch our video together.
We did a session on image genetics, and if you would like to take image genetics profile, please approach Jeffers.
Ethan also quick to shift to the image genetics profile. The little small icon that pop up.
I have it too.
Yeah, because we did it for the day itself, where we were comparing between StrengthsFinder and image genetics.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So I mean, Jeff. Okay, because image genetics requires a coach to go through with you. So I would highly recommend Jeffers, because he's been very helpful for both me and my group of friends when we ran a session with him. So highly recommend him. For StrengthsFinder, clearly, I will always go back to Alex. Even though you're a StrengthsFinder coach yourself, right, Daniel?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So you don't need to go to Alex for this.
Maybe I need to go to Daniel for it.
Maybe.
No, not at all.
No,
Every
I think
coach needs a coach.
I think peer coaching is always useful, right? Like when we talk about this, I think especially when both are coaches or whatever, I think that's where the real value is lying. I think my bias for Big Five came out really clearly today. Sorry, guys. But for me, I think the key reason why I actually wanted to talk about it is also the dangers of using profiling tools that actually uses certain kind of words and uses certain kind of things to create policies or create different things. So actually, by the way, Big Five has been used for policy making as well, which is a very dangerous tool. Because if you say if a person is high in openness, they are more likely to take drugs, which is okay. we also means likely to end up being addicted to like gaming, for example. That's what they also talk about. The key part here is like more likely doesn't mean they will. And that's where the line really starts blurring once you start using profiling tools to start doing policy level work, to start doing judgment of whether a person fits a company. Because again, self-reported. Secondly is a lot of them already have inbuilt biases that does not promote diversity as well as a positive way or a coaching and developmental aspect of how you use the tools. Right. So for example, again, we go back to StrengthsFinder Emergent Ethics. It's very focused on, look, this is where you are. Here's how you improve. Here are the ways of developing yourself. Every single tool that we have touched on so far, except for Big Five, came with people who help you develop yourself in those areas, right? So we don't have a Big Five expert because there's no official Big Five expert, because it's open source, and that comes with its own problems. And as much as it could be a very useful tool, if used right, it has actually kind of fallen into this category of overused and misunderstood, and sadly well-researched, but not really usefully researched, in my opinion. And I think in our discussion today, especially because we're all coaches or interested in personal development and self-development, I think for us, tools like this become a very useful talking point to say, hey, here's where it might not be too useful, but it's at least just a reference point, versus, like if we take a like StrengthsFinder or even MBTI, it's a good reference point. It doesn't decide who you are or how good you are. But here comes Big Five, which actually tells you, hey, you're being you're not conscientious enough. Hey, you are too neurotic. Or where there are all these elements that can come in once you use them. And the recognition that because of the lack of regulation, the lack of a body that focuses on developing these materials in a manner that's very positive focused, as well as or very growth oriented, it can be misused. So, and I think with that, we can wrap up today's session. Thank you everybody for your wonderful sharing and your thoughts. And we hope to see you next round where we're talking about
Shadow self?
Shadow self. Jungian concepts. My playground. Jefford, how much research have you gone into that?
Not much, but we can talk about it then. So
oh, you want a beer connect? Oh yeah, we cannot beer connect, damn it.
Yeah,
virtual beer connect.
So we'll do it as part of Quick Connect Live. Bring your beer. We can have beer while we connect on Quick Connect. So quick beer connect. Like.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
See you.
See you guys. Good night. Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Thanks.